Hello everybody, welcome to another edition of What's Going On. As always, we are very thankful you take the time from your busy day to view our program. And with myself and the people behind the camera, we hope everybody had a wonderful Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And I hope everyone kept in mind that Jesus is the reason for the season. And I hope that we understand that the clock is ticking, and this is certainly going to be a very interesting year coming up. We are 290-something days from the election coming up. And I will tell you, my friends, two things I'd like to say before I get into the concrete information. In the game of Go, it's a Japanese board game. It is taught in all the major military academies around the world. 7 basic rules. Every stone has equal power. But in the game of Go, there is a thing called sente. And with sente, what sente is a barometer as to who is responding to who. Am I responding to my opponent, or is my opponent responding to me? And I will tell you that up until the last 3 years, the American people have been responding to the globalist, the international bankers. Ever since 1913 on up until 2016, the American people have been responding on the defense, if you would, to the international bankers. That changed with the election of Trump, not just because of Trump, but what got Trump into the executive branch. Now, the influx and fluctuation of sente currently is going back and forth on a daily basis, which makes for a very potentially hostile environment, because as one gains sente, the other counter gains, and then we gain until we get to this point of what Albert Pike called the culmination crisis. And that's where we are right now, my friends. And this is going to be a very tumultuous year because also with the sente aspect, for the first time since 1913, the bankers are on the clock. And what I mean by that is they're on the clock because for the first time since 1913, when the bankers took over the issuance of the currency and the issuance of the currency here in the United States, they've been working at their time. Everything has been on their time. But now they have a deadline to make, because if they can't hook and crook and cheat the election, which they still may be able to do, we're going to see that the education efforts of many, many Americans over this year, over these last 3 years, and prior to that, like I said, that's what got Trump elected, and others, is going to really put them in a state that they need to act, and they need to act not so subtly as they always have, little baby small steps. No, they've got to do it in large steps. And this is what makes this year so tumultuous potentially, is that the sente, the battle for sente, is wavering back and forth on a daily basis. And for the first time since 1913, the international bankers are on the clock. Okay, let us get into some information. This is a quote from Edmund Burke. "The people never give up their liberties, but under some delusion." And that gets us back to that Hegelian dialectic that I have spoken about on this program constantly, because they use it constantly. And for those of you, we get a lot of new viewers on a weekly basis. For those of you that aren't familiar with the Hegelian dialectic, if you would, picture a triangle, the 3 points of a triangle. The first point is to create a crisis, okay? And they have to create a crisis to get an emotional response from the people that they wish to manipulate. Now, when you study Johann Hegel, which was an 19th century German philosopher, he wrote that you always had to have fear in the equation. Fear and love are the biggest motivators. So you always had to have fear in that equation. And if you could put anger in that equation also, you would easily get the people to accept what you wanted to all along. So you create a crisis, you get the emotional response you want from the people, and the people will welcome your solution because of the emotional response of that anger or fear and because of the crisis that you created. They do this on a daily basis. I see it all the time. And also, my friends, when these crises begin, always ask yourself, Latin, qui bono? Who's benefiting? Who is benefiting from the results of this crisis? Take 9/11, a complete inside job. If anyone still believes that 9/11 was done by 19 hijackers who couldn't fly a plane and did everything went down, the military standing down, all the rest of it, all the failures of the intelligence communities, all of that, who benefited from 9/11? Did the American people? No. The Patriot Acts were written prior to 9/11. The document that orchestrated 9/11, the PNAC document, Project for the New American Century, which we read to you verbatim, how they wanted to have a new Pearl Harbor. So it was orchestrated with the PNAC. It was the Patriot Acts 1 and 2 and many other acts that followed 9/11 were written prior to 9/11. But who benefited? The American people lost liberties. The American people were taxed to the high heavens. The American people's sons and daughters went overseas to conquer lands and bleed. While the government, did they benefit? Absolutely. They brought in all the tax revenue. They strengthened their authority. And the international bankers financed the whole thing and put the government in more debt and in more profit to the international bankers above and beyond the profit that they made going through these various countries that we have destroyed. And how is it that we went into Afghanistan when all of the perpetrators that was sold to the American people, the delusion that Edmund Burke speaks of here, were in Saudi Arabia, but we wound up in Afghanistan? So understand this, my friends. And Edmund Burke was correct. The people never give up their liberties, but under some delusion. And that's going on right now in many facets, and let's get into that. Okay. We're going to be talking a little bit about the United Nations. So I would like to read some quotes to you about the United Nations, different committees and so forth. This is U.S. Senator James Eastland, investigating the activities of U.S. citizens employed by the United Nations hearing in the Senate Committee on the Judiciary in 1952. I am appalled at the evidence indicating that there is today in the UN among the American employees there the greatest concentration of communists that this committee has ever encountered. These people occupy high positions. They have very high salaries, and almost all of these people have in the past been employees in the U.S. government in high and sensitive positions. Amazing. Absolutely amazing. Okay. We're all familiar with this gentleman here, Mr. Barry Goldwater. And this is a quote that we have from him about the Federal Reserve Bank, the international bankers. Most Americans have no real understanding of the operation of the international moneylenders. The accounts of the Federal Reserve System have never been audited. It operates outside the control of Congress and manipulates the credit of the United States. And my friends, that quote, I believe, is from 1965. And yes, the accounts of the Federal Reserve, a private foreign for-profit bank, which does control and manipulate the credit of this country and many others, has never been audited. But what did Mr. Barry Goldwater have to say about the United Nations? The time has come to recognize the United Nations for the anti-American, anti-freedom organization it has become. The time has come for us to cut all financial help, withdraw as a member, and ask the United Nations to find a headquarters location outside the United States that is more in keeping with the philosophy of the majority of the voting members, someplace like Moscow or Peking. Of course, Moscow and Peking at that time in 1965 were the strongholds of communism. And by the way, folks, we put Mao and we put Stalin and all them people into place to make Moscow and Peking the center of communism. Let us continue. Mr. Thomas Jefferson. When all government, domestic and foreign, in little as in great things, shall be drawn to Washington as the center of all power, it will render powerless the checks provided of one government on another, and will become as venal and oppressive as the government from which we separated. Mr. Jefferson was absolutely correct. Okay, my friends, let's get into some interesting things. We have a new year coming up that just arrived. And the very first thing I want to say, I'm not going to touch on this too much today, but the very first thing I want to say is last year I did quite a bit of information about food, the potential shortages and what's going on with food. And I've been keeping up with that, but I've got so much material because there's so much going on. I just want to reiterate again to you, but I am reading reports from private and governmental agencies, marketing agencies, farming alliances and associations, that the cost of food potentially is going to escalate up to 135%. So my point being is when you go to the supermarket, buy a little bit of extra. If you have the funds to put some long-term food storage away, please do it. Remember what Heinz, you know him as Henry Kissinger, said. If you wish to control nations, you control oil. If you wish to control people, you control food. And do you remember I forget the woman's name right now, that when we were in Mogadishu, she said that food is power, and we make no apologies for it. So my friends, it's very important that you understand this, that food is going and has been historically used as a weapon. Okay, now, recently we had an attack in Iraq, and this turned out not to be like Benghazi. President Trump reacted literally within minutes of getting the information. The embassy in attack in Iran, he sent over 100 Marines. But what really got me was that the Iraqi security forces stood down. And here's another thing that really got me. The leader of the organization that attacked, and the leader of the group is called Badr, B-A-D-R organization. The leader of the organization is Nadeed Haid al-Amari. And when I read that name, I said, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Not only did that guy supposedly get killed before, but then I had to look it up to make sure I was right. And I was right. Nadeed Haid al-Amari was a guest of President Obama at the White House in 2011. Probably making arrangements for that $150 billion that he gave Iran to make sure he got his little cut. Can you believe that? So not only has this guy supposedly died numerous times, but he was a guest for President Obama at the White House in 2011. Unbelievable. Some other information from the past year that I jotted down here. Well, some of it for the last decade, I should say. Global stocks have increased by $25 trillion in the last 10 years. In the United States, 84% of all stocks are owned by less than 10% of the population. Unbelievable. Also, the U.S. government is more than $23 trillion in debt, even though it collected record tax revenue. The Obama and Trump administrations have added over $12 trillion in debt. Now, mind you, folks, when I say we're in debt, we have a 2% fractional banking system. And what that means is for whatever they loan out, the bank has 2 cents for every dollar they loan out. Look it up. 2% fractional banking system. But where this debt is coming from is that for every Federal Reserve note, you call them dollars, but they're not dollars because a dollar is 25.8 grades of gold and a 51 ratio of silver. We have no gold, we have no silver. We have the script of a private foreign bank, Federal Reserve note, an acknowledgement of debt. But for every Federal Reserve note that is issued, there is an interest bond due on it. So you print the original one, well, now you got to print another one to cover the original interest bond on the first one, but now you got to print 2 to cover the bond on the second one. Now you got to print 4 to cover the bond on the first 2. It's perpetual debt. That's what this debt is all about. So understand, folks, this is what it is. It's perpetual debt. In this system, you cannot get out of debt. So what does this come down to? For every single hour of every single day, we are borrowing more than 100 million Federal Reserve notes from future generations. So in the 1 hour that I'm going to have with you, we are going to, I'll use the word steal, 100 million Federal Reserve notes from future generations, and all of them have an interest bond due on them. Really amazing. Now, the IMF, not to be outdone, International Monetary Fund, reports that total global debt is at $188 trillion. And how does that break down here in the United States? U.S. corporations are over $10 trillion in debt, which is roughly, my friends, 47% of our gross domestic product. Total household debt is over $14 trillion. And this study found that 70% of Americans are struggling financially. Well, how can they not be? When our lack of money system is based on debt. 71% of U.S. families cannot afford to purchase homes. 58 million jobs in the United States pay under $790 a week. And according to the Social Security Administration, 50% of all Americans make less than $33,000 a year. Now, 63% of all U.S. jobs created since 1990 have been what the Social Security Administration considers low-wage jobs. 40 million Americans struggle with food insecurity, and that's about to get a lot worse. Unbelievable. So what are Americans ingesting? Well, a recent government study said that 24.6 million Americans have taken illegal drugs in the last 30 days. And 46% of all Americans have taken at least one legal drug in the last 30 days. Folks, that's over 70% of our population in the last 30 days that's taken drugs, whether they're legal or illegal. 70% of our population. Americans, last year, it hasn't come out for 19, for 2018, spent more than $140 billion treating cancer. And you think they want to cure cancer? That's what they spent treating cancer. Never mind what, like the American Cancer Society and all these other societies that, go out and collect money for cancer treatment. But what are our chances of having cancer? Well, in the United States, if you're a woman, it's 1 in 3. And if you're a man, it's 1 out of 2 now. But yet, we spent, in 2018, $140 billion treating cancer. In this past decade, suicide rate amongst youngest Americans have increased by over 41%. A comparative survey discovered that 15-year-old students in China are 4 full grade levels ahead of 15-year-old Americans in mathematics and science. Our high-price indoctrination school systems are doing, people say, oh, they're such a failure. No, my friends, they're doing exactly what they were meant to do, to deliberately dumb us down. In 2019, over 1/3 of U.S. teenagers did not read a single book. Yet, they spent an average of 86 hours a month on cell phones. Over 23% of U.S. children live in single parents. It's the highest rate in the entire world, my friends, by a very large margin. Only 38% of Americans know the Constitution is the highest law of the land. Well, I can tell you right now, there aren't many in government that know the Constitution is the highest law in the land. 40% of all U.S. babies were born to single or unmarried women, while fertility rates have fallen by over 15% since 2007, and the fertility rate, my friends, is now the lowest it's ever been recorded. Half of all homeless people in the United States now live in California. And then the states that then we can break it down. From there, it goes to Washington, D.C., New York, Hawaii, and Oregon. Now, a recent survey in California, half of the voting population of California is considering leaving the state. I can't believe it's only half. Now, here's how we are with how our academia is doing. 58% of Americans under 35 agree that socialism would be good for the country. Let me read that again. 58% of Americans under 35 agree that socialism would be good for the country. Listen to this one. Almost 40% of all millennials are living with their parents. Let me say that again to you. Almost 40% of all millennials are living with their parents. The Pew Research found that only 65% of Americans consider themselves to be Christians, but only 23% of 17 and under describe themselves as Christians. And a similar survey was done in Russia on the Russian youth. 68% of the youth in Russia describe themselves as being Christians. 67% of all Americans believe we are on the verge of a civil war. My friends, I don't know what the other 33% are doing. The Civil War has already begun. Let's look at this map. I know we had this map 3 weeks ago for you. This is the map of sanctuary cities and counties. Now, this map would be a lot redder. Just in the state of Virginia alone are the 95 counties in Virginia. 91 of them have signed on as Second Amendment sanctuary counties. Look at New England. Not a one. Not a one. This is a map and graph of the total gun provisions. Now, if you look at New England, you will see that Vermont has the least, with 6. But if you had this map up 2 years ago, over 2 years ago, it would have read 0. So which way is Vermont trending? The lower 3 states are completely gone politically. There are some strongholds. You know, you got Idaho and Wyoming and Montana out here and South Dakota and some others. But if you took this map and superimposed it with a demographic map of conservative and liberal, I hate using the word liberal, but that's what we accept it as, you would see that these numbers coincide precisely with the superimposed demographic red and blue map. Precisely. So Vermont is trending in the wrong direction. And take a good look at this map, my friends, because for those of you that are thinking to get out of New York, and California, and other places, look at New Jersey, Connecticut, Mass, Rhode Island. Forget about it. The lower 3 New England states are politically lost ground if you're a constitutional Christian conservative. Politically lost ground. If you're in those 3 states, you need to get the hell out before this civil war goes kinetic. And it's going to go kinetic. Let us continue. Now this map here is the percentage of who owns guns. This isn't per capita, this is the percentage of each individual state. Now Vermont in New England has the highest percentage of gun ownership for its population at 28.8%. Of course, Maine does well at 22.6. New Hampshire surprised me coming in as low as it did at 14.4. Massachusetts surprised me coming in at 22.6. Rhode Island, 5.8. 5.8. But again, if you go out to Idaho and Montana, the Dakotas, Wyoming, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, Illinois, Iowa, Wisconsin. The rest of the country, my friends, is proportionally speaking, I won't say well armed, but decently armed. The last numbers I read, they estimate there's 302 million firearms in this country. I personally think that's exaggerated, but still. And that, you know, I hear this all the time. Oh, they can never do anything with us because, you know, there's too many guns. Just in the state of Pennsylvania, there's over 200,000 hunters. Folks, an army isn't a group of people just because they got guns. there's an awful lot that goes into making an effective defensive or offensive fighting force. A tremendous amount of training, logistics, communications, control, and desire. Having a bunch of hunters out in the woods does not create a well-organized militia, which is what we're supposed to have. So keep this to memory. Now, while we're on these graphs, let's take a look at every governor's salary by state. And I'll tell you who's doing pretty well. Mr. Phil Scott, the governor of Vermont, gets $145,538 a year. Where you got a person like Greg Abbott down there in Texas, which geographically is bigger than the entire original 13 colonies, gets $150,000. So you can take a look at this and see that these governors are doing very well. When I looked at this, I believe Maine paid their governor the least at $70,000. But even you think about this. The governor of Vermont, for the small state it is, it's one of the lowest populated states in the country, does very well for himself. And he's the governor that signed into law the first gun laws in the state's history. Okay. So, let's get into some things here. We have drone reports that are 6 foot large, and they're traveling in packs of between 10 and 50 that have been reported in Colorado, Nebraska, Georgia, and Texas. Nobody knows what it's about. Nobody. No one from the government is coming out and saying this is what this is about. Now, the governor of Virginia, besides keeping babies alive to harvest body parts, on this January 8th is enacting a bill to do roadblocks, roaming roadblocks to check for firearms. And this bill, he also upped funding for more law enforcement and for more prison and correction facilities to house the people and re-educate the people that refuse to turn in their guns. The Attorney General and Governor both of Virginia have said they will not recognize the Second Amendment sanctuary counties. They'll recognize having illegals come into the country to murder and mayhem. That's fine, we're good. But they won't recognize your right of self-protection. I personally believe in Virginia is a shock test. Remember Silent Weapons for Quiet was a shock test which is underway to actually provoke a shooting conflict as a justification to invoke martial law, to seize private firearms from citizens. And if you don't think that that's possible, you have a short memory. You remember what happened in Boston during the marathon bombing? They went from house to house to house to house to house at gunpoint. And what about Operation Jade Helm? Operation Jade Helm 15 and Operation Jade Helm 16. And for those of you that are new to the show, Jade Helm was a domestic military operation. It stood for Joint Assistance Deployment Exercise, and the Helm stood for Homeland Eradication of Local Militants. Folks, guess who the local militants are? We know it from the MIOC document that we read to you years ago. That's you and I. The reason why and I said it back then, Jade Helm was the military drilling for where the military's next war is going to be. here in the United States. Now, also, we have reports from very reliable sources that there are tens of thousands of UN troops that have recently been placed in Cuba and other places. A lot of the sheriffs, my friends, in Virginia, especially Sheriff Jenkins, this man face-to-face told the governor, I will deputize thousands. You see, they're afraid of the sheriffs. I'm going to tell you why. Because the sheriffs have the highest authority in law enforcement in this country. All of our law enforcement, my friends, were supposed to be elected by the people. And that's why sheriffs are elected by the people. And that's why on the books today, they still have the highest authority. Now, why did I mention the UN troops? Because the UN, while I'm on this, there's these other bills like this also going on in Kentucky, Ohio, Georgia, California, and New York. Now, Representative Tom Massey from Kentucky made the statement just this morning that law enforcement officers will go to jail and refuse to confiscate weapons. My friends, the United Nations gave themselves authority to go into nations throughout the world with they wrote it themselves. It's called the Kilgagi Provisions. K-I-L-G-A-L-I, Kilgagi. And what it basically says is that if they determine that they need to go into a country, or if they are requested to go into a nation, they'll go in. So if the governor of Virginia knows that, number one, 91 out of 95 counties have declared, by vote, sanctuary cities and counties, and if all these sheriffs are saying, no, we are not going to confiscate weapons, and as Sheriff Jenkins told the governor, I will deputize thousands, and in 2 counties in Virginia, they went back to the old laws and actually are funding monies to train militia. Do you think this is going to go kinetic, my friends? And it's not just Virginia. Virginia is the shock test. Because Virginia voted so strongly Democratic at the last election, they thought they could get away with this. But the people who were on the couch, because now it's potentially going to knock at your front door, they got off the couch. The people that were on the fence saying, oh, I don't want to get involved. If I just stay low and silent, they'll go right by me, right over me. They'll leave me alone. Are discovering, as history proves, it doesn't work that way. My friends, yeah, there are 2 kinds of people in this world, givers and takers. I agree with that. But the other aspect of that equation is there are people who want to be left alone, and there are people who will not leave you alone. And you will find the ones that will not leave you alone are hungry for political power, and they are put in positions of political power so they can use force to not leave you alone. In Tennessee, currently, they are doing, because a lot of patriots, Tennessee right now, my friends, is the number 2 go-to state. And a lot of patriots are moving to Tennessee. So what's going on in Tennessee right now? There is a major, major flow of illegal immigrants coming in from Africa. And a lot of people are upset about it. A lot. And this whole thing with the guns in Virginia, and ordo ab chaos, order from chaos. Well, this is going to be a national blanket, my friends. Like I said, Virginia is just a shock test. See what the people will put up with. And I don't make predictions on this show, but I have been studying these people, my friends, literally since 1978. Literally. And I'm here to tell you, the potential, historically speaking, for a false flag, blaming conservatives, Trump supporters, Christians for it, is highly potential. We had the shooting in Texas where, in church, a gentleman took out the assailant in a matter of seconds because he was armed. Did you notice how that went away quick in the media? My friends, the immigration problem is being orchestrated, and it's all part of the warfare being waged against the American people. There's symmetrical warfare and there's asymmetrical warfare. Right now, the immigration problem, it used to be asymmetrical, but now it's going symmetrical. With the crime rates, the liability, all of it. Let's get into some of them statistics because I'm running out of time. In 2018, 57% of all households are led by a legal or illegal immigrant. The cost of legalizing all the current illegals into this system and country would be $6.3 trillion. And mind you, that $6.3 trillion comes with an interest bond due on each and every one of it. Do you remember when Obama was handing out pamphlets in various countries telling the immigrants to come here and that they would not check IDs even when applying for food stamps? Remember that? We read one of them pamphlets to you. Department of Homeland Security just reported last week that they have lost track of over 1 million illegals. Don't know where they are. They didn't show up for court. What's going to happen to you and I if we don't show up for court? Just like Joe Biden, I'm not going to go to that subpoena. What happens to you and I if we did that? One in 5 children living in LA County has an illegal parent. Excuse me, over 1 in 5 children living in LA County has an illegal parent. LA County spent over $600 million on welfare for children of illegals. Again, interest bond due on each and every one of that $600 million. The U.S. taxpayers, this is nationwide, in 2018, spent $12 billion in the school year on children of illegals. Illegals make up well over 33% of the prison population at a cost of over $1.7 billion in 2018. The federal government has launched a website to teach illegals how to sign up for benefits. According to the FBI, 1.4 million gang members are illegals. And I found an example that I found astonishing. In the city of California, they have a gang task force, which has 200 police officers assigned to it. So I said, wow, I wonder how many illegal gangsters are in Chicago. I read 4 studies. The lowest number, and I'm going to give you the lowest number I found, was just over 100,000. So you've got 100,000 illegal gang members, this is the low numbers, in Chicago alone. And the police have a task force to deal with these people of 200. Mexican drug cartels made an estimate $6.6 billion in 2018, and according to the multiple U.S. agencies, openly conducted military operations in the United States. Do you remember we reported to you about the 2 American soldiers that were disarmed in the United States by Mexican soldiers? We read that to you verbatim. And the new Senate immigration bill that just got signed is going to bring in another 33 million illegals. So, minus just the cost, what about the medical cost? What diseases are coming along with these people? Some of these diseases was completely eradicated out of the country. But let me give you a list. These are diseases that are now back online in the United States because of illegals. Tuberculosis, measles, whooping cough, mumps, scarlet fever, Ebola, bubonic plague, typhoid. All mass casualty diseases. Did you hear about the St. Teresa School, speaking of this? Did you hear about the St. Teresa School in Houston, Texas? They had to close the entire facility down for pertussis. Now, pertussis, my friends, you may recognize it as whooping cough. But here's the clincher. 100% of the children at that school, 100% of the children at that school were vaccinated against it. Now, according to Dr. Donald Murphy, the Texas Medical Association Committee on Infectious Diseases, the only way to stop pertussis growth is for adults to get TDAP vaccine. Well, then why the heck are you poisoning the kids with the pertussis vaccine? Boy, folks, I got to go back to the vaccine some point. All right, I'm running out of time. I'm running out of time. You know, folks, I got to tell you, there's so much going on that I could do a 4-hour show with you just with what went on this week. You're looking for a job? The UN is hiring in New York. They're looking for English-speaking, this is their own writing, English-speaking disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration officers. Let me say that again. The UN is hiring in New York. They're looking for, quote-unquote, English-speaking disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration officers. Within delegated authority, the disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration officer will be responsible for the following duties. Acts as a focal point for the DDR components for 2 to 3 missions responsible for planning, support, and implementation along with evaluation of missions. Participants will be integrated task force planning meetings for the establishment of a new peacekeeping mission with a potential DDR component. Again, that DDR is disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration. Folks, this is right out of Chairman Mao's book, Re-education plans. Remember when Hillary said, well, we need camps for adults, and all the fools were laughing? That's what they were talking about. You will provide technical assistance to peace negotiations, participate in technical assessment missions, advise, develops, and reviews initial DDR functional strategy and concept of operations for further development into a full DDR component, and the National DDR Commission. Drafts and reviews of DDR interprets to the special committee report, code cables, and talking points. Develop initial result-based framework and budget for new DDR components in the new missions of the future. Liaison with the United Nations Development Program and donor communities to reuse voluntary contributions for DDR programs. Can you say George Soros? Present and or defend new and subsequent DDR requirements. Provide technical clearance for applicants to DDR for new and future and ongoing missions. Provide headquarters support in the planning of the civilian and military logistics support for the DDR. Conduct field missions. Assess and implementation, establish the DDR programs from those field missions. Where they desire experience of 7 years of relevant experience in disarmament affairs, political analysis, or national military service, preferably related to the design, implementation, and review of the DDR. Disarmament is the collection, documentation, control, and disposal of all small arms, communications, explosives, light and heavy weapons of combatants, often in the civilian population. Folks, I'm reading their document verbatim to you. Also includes the development of responsible arms management programs. Now, President Trump withdrew the United States from the 2013 UN Arms Trade Treaty. But I want you to look up, I ran out of time. I want you to look up UN document 7277. I'm going to say it again. Please, folks, look this up. UN document 7277. Because we're still in that one. My friends, I have run out of time. And what I wish to say to you is, this isn't happening by happen chance. This is being implemented, orchestrated, and they're 5 steps ahead of the game. But Virginia was a shock test. And it's going to be a shock test. And I'm sure they're a little surprised by the results of their shock test so far. My friends, all warfare escalates in steps. And I'm here to tell you, I hope it doesn't happen. I pray to God it doesn't happen. But I really believe, because of the clock and of the balance of Sente, that this is going to go kinetic. My friends, we're very thankful you took the time of your busy day to view our program. We always close in asking you to seek truth, obtain knowledge, and manifest kindness to your fellow man. And we always close in reminding you that your government is your responsibility. And we thank you for watching.
Got to read between the lines. Got to read between the lines. find.